All right, so I want to delve into one other aspect of this flag burning story here, because Glenn Greenwald posted this video, which he found, which was a good find. Here's former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, probably the single most popular justice among the American right in the last 5 decades, explaining why burning the American flag is vital free speech under the First Amendment and why banning it is clearly unconstitutional. I'm glad that Glenn found this video, and I'm glad he made the point that Scalia is considered like the arch conservative of arch conservatives.
Right.
I mean, he was considered the furthest right
Right.
on the bench when he was on the bench. So we're going to take a look at this.
I would not allow people to go about burning the American. If I were king, I would not allow people to go about burning the American flag. However, we have a First Amendment which says that the right of free speech shall not be abridged, and it is addressed in particular to speech critical of the government. I mean, that was the main kind of speech that tyrants would seek to suppress. Burning the flag is a form of expression. Speech doesn't just mean written words or oral words. It could be semaphore. Burning a flag is a symbol that expresses an idea. I hate the government is unjust, whatever.
If you're not sure, then in the end, and no one knows the Constitution better than you do, doesn't it come down to your personal interpretation of the Constitution? If it isn't clear-cut, which it clearly isn't, you in the end have to make an opinion, don't you?
Well, don't forget, this person has to be convicted by a jury of 12 people who unanimously have to find that he was inciting to riot. So, it's not all up to me. It would be up to me to say that there was not enough evidence for the jury to find that, perhaps. But ultimately, the right of jury trial is the protection.
Okay, so he articulates it right there. He sounds like we sound, and like I said, that is arch conservative Antonin Scalia saying, of course, burning the flag is protected as expression under the First Amendment. Where there is evidence of underlying crime, in other words, burning it in order to incite a riot, you can prosecute there if there's probable cause, which is essentially what this executive order says. So that made the rounds. And so J.D. Vance found it important to respond. Few things, he says. Antonin Scalia was a great Supreme Court justice and a genuinely kind and decent person. 2, the president's executive order is consistent with Texas v. Johnson. And 3, Texas v. Johnson was wrong and William Rehnquist was right. Rehnquist was one of the dissenters, although he did not pen the dissenting opinion. So there's J.D. Vance having it all ways possible, right? Scalia was a great guy. The ruling in that case was wrong, but Trump's executive order abides by that ruling. So Trump trashed the ruling right before he signed it. We saw it on video. He actually mentions the fact that, well, you had a liberal court that's a 5-4. It was 5-4, which meant Scalia actually sided with the liberals. That's why the ruling went that way. The conservatives had what they needed to pass it if he did not pull a John McCain there. But the once again, just kind of having it always there. Zed Jelani says, JD, this is a good question. Why did you spend months bashing Europe over its free speech policies only for your administration to become the most anti-free speech administration in America since Richard Nixon? Yeah, that is a good question. That's a really good question. Yeah. Right? You have J.D. Vance backing this play after that great lecture that he gave the Europeans.
Well, I seem to remember, Keaton, at the time that he gave that whole owning the EU speech, a lot of commentators in our space were busting a nut over that speech. And we pointed out, well, he's saying more by what he's not talking about than what he's talking about. And, of course, what he was not talking about in any way were all the journalists being persecuted in Europe, in some cases arrested and tried for reporting on Israel and Palestine. All he really wanted to talk about were right-wing culture war issues like praying by an abortion clinic, which I agree with that, what he said about it as far as it goes. But to be giving this fiery speech, how you're going to put the Europeans on the back foot about their violations against free speech, and just commit this glaring omission of the greatest example of Europe's assault on speech at that moment. I don't understand how you watch that and you come out the other side and go, you see, he told them. He told
right.
them. What did he tell them? What did he tell them? That there's an enormous Israel carve out on free speech. That's okay. You can suppress that.
Right.
You can suppress that. Just don't suppress the born agains.
Exactly. So Matt Van Swol replies, this guy, I mean, the pick me of all pick me motherfuckers, Matt Van Swol. It's kind of surprised me, the sheer volume of people who did not read the actual executive order. If you didn't, please do, or just read the highlighted part below. Okay, you know who didn't read it, Matt? Donald Trump didn't read. We know he didn't read it because he said to the camera, he says, I hope that's in there. I hope that language is in there, inciting the riot. So he clearly did not read it. He didn't understand the first thing about it because he thought it meant we're going to jail you for burning a flag, period. So he highlights, and prosecute those who incite violence or otherwise violate our laws while desecrating this symbol of our country. So Matt Van Swol is saying, hey, look, I wish people would read this before they criticize it. It doesn't even ban flag burning. Well, tell that to your dear leader because he clearly didn't read it either. So here's just some background, facts and case summary, Texas versus Johnson, just to give you some background as to what Scalia was talking about. Gregory Lee Johnson burned an American flag outside the convention center where the 1984 Republican National Convention was being held in Dallas, Texas. Well, you know, don't forget, they didn't have Grindr back then, so you had to send some kind of signal at the RNC that you were game. Maybe that's what he was doing.
Well, well, back then that was slang for I'm flaming.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I'm surprised his lawyer missed that. His lawyer should have argued that. He's just trying to make a friend. That's all.
Well, this is why very often members of that community will say how important it is to be represented by people who are part of that community.
Right.
Because otherwise, how do you know the language? How do you know the vocabulary?
Exactly. It may not even have gone to the Supreme Court if they had made that argument earlier.
Yep.
Right. Johnson burned the flag to protest the policies of President Ronald Reagan. He was arrested and charged with violating a Texas statute that prevented the desecration of a venerated object, including the American flag, if such action were likely to incite anger in others. So not incite violence, incite anger. Well, that's clearly unconstitutional. You're allowed to incite anger in someone.
Sure.
You're just not allowed to incite violence, right? That's the difference between words and actions. The whole reason you have a First Amendment is because there's a difference between words and actions.
Yep.
Right. So the issue, whether flag burning constitutes symbolic speech protected by the First Amendment, ruling, yes. And it was a 5-4 win. The dissent was written by Stevens, not Rehnquist, although Vance name-dropped Rehnquist in his tweet. Writing for the dissent, Justice Stevens argued that the flag's unique status as a symbol of national unity outweighed symbolic speech concerns, and thus the government could lawfully prohibit flag burning. So that is, of course, an absurd
it's not based in anything.
It's not based in anything. It's based on emotion. Yeah.
Well, that's why you got Scalia, because his whole legal theory was strict adherence to the Constitution.
Yes. That's why a lot of people. I mean, I've met people who are I won't even say like left, but you know, most like serious scholars had a respect for Scalia, even if they didn't agree with him, even because he was a very right wing. But they had a respect for him because of that, because of what you just said. Like he was actually principled in his view that his job was to enforce the Constitution, and there were certain places he wouldn't go. He's not Clarence Thomas, who would do anything.
Not. I was just thinking.
He was a serious
like Clarence Thomas.
He's a serious guy. You know, not only was he, you know, a serious guy, but that video that we showed at the beginning of this clip really shows you sort of how far we have slid in an anti-democratic orientation, right? Because there had for so long been a somewhat of a gentleman's agreement that there are certain places we will not go, because once you set precedent in such a way as this would, if it said what Trump says it said, which it does not, if you set precedent that is such an egregious violation of the Constitution and the courts sign off on it, well, at that point, there's no one left to guard the hen house at that point. It's just open season. And we have come a long way since then. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And, I blame first and foremost the people who were tasked with actually fulfilling the promises of revolutionary moments like the civil rights movement, like the anti-war movement, people who were really tasked with taking the ball much further down the field and who instead deferred to capital and let this country become the sort of hollowed out hellhole that it is. That is what drove people into such despair that they no longer have any respect for that gentleman's agreement. Right. So we could talk about how we got here, but that agreement, that social contract, if you will, it's a rough use of the term, is really up for grabs at the moment, to put it very mildly. You could say it's fallen into the hands of people who simply don't give a shit, like Donald Trump, who couldn't even be bothered to read what this said. He's just so chomping at the bit to throw people in jail for violating the honor of the United States by burning a flag.
Well, I think a lot of people who accept this or are, thrilled to see them going about this, systematically people have become very ignorant about what the core premise of the country is. And I think that's quite intentional. They stopped teaching civics for a reason, because they got this massive uprising in the 60s and 70s of a generation that had been raised to understand what was constitutional and what wasn't. Most people don't know that today. You were taught that in school at one time. Why'd they get rid of that? Why would you, in a country premised on the idea that people can only govern themselves if they're educated in the system of government, why would you get rid of that class? That was mandatory at one time. Why would you stop making that mandatory?
Right.
Because you don't want informed citizens. You don't want people who understand how it's supposed to work. I always say America was conceived really as a libertarian country, and I think that's true. I mean, there are other elements there. There are elements of oligarchy right from the beginning, sure, but there was a deep suspicion at the core of the American project from the beginning of state power and the way that state power could be used to crush the rights of the individual.
Right.
What the Trump administration is doing is, where legal precedent is in their way, they're just using the machinery of the state to crush the individual. So, well, we can't charge them with flag burning. Well, we could make their life a nightmare. How do you as an individual fight that? Look at the resources of the government. That's exactly why these protections are in place, and a big part of the Trump administration's agenda, from this flag burning thing to Abrego Garcia, is if we can't get you according to the letter of the law, we're going to do everything we can to violate its spirit being the government should not be weaponized against the individual in that way. That's really what they're throwing out.
Exactly.
Please clap.